Not a matter of if, but when crisis will rock your world. I'm Roshini Rajkumar, licensed attorney, crisis strategist, and host of The Crisis Files. In each case file, we explore real-world crisis so you can avoid your own. Countless emotion-charged headlines leave me wondering, what's the cost of leaders not regulating emotions? I dive into this with Dr. Tyler Arvig, Associate Chief Clinical Officer at R3 Continuum, a global leader in workplace behavioral health. Dr. Arvig is here for the case file I call Ego Dysregulation. First, Dr. Arvig, I think it's important we get that definition out of the way. What is ego or emotional dysregulation?
Really, it is what it sounds like, right? Which is an inability for us to regulate our emotions, sometimes our thoughts, and how those things go together. So most of us do this well most of the time, right? But during times of increased stress, increased pressure, or significant external pressures or forces, that can really challenge our ability to regulate our emotions. And as leaders, that's one of the things we have to do every day, all the time.
When all of these headlines are happening recently here in July 2025, the workplace shooting in New York when a shooter walks into an office building on Park Avenue of all places and opens fire, 4 people dead, including a police officer who was off duty at the time. You hear about that. It's not just the crime of the shooting, but it's now the devastation of all of those people in those various offices and having to run and having to get under a desk or barricade a door, barricade themselves into a room. So your firm gets in there and works with these companies on that emotional side of things.
Absolutely. So something like this happens, it captures the headlines, it's, played 24/7 on the news. We all dig into it and, there's questions about the motives and questions that are unanswered and all those kind of things. What we don't often think of is what are the after effects for those that are left having experienced it. So, obviously we think about the effects of those that were close to those that died. But there were many other people in that building or around that area. And workplaces, for the most part, for most of us, are safe places. We don't think of it as a place where danger is going to happen, where we're going to be challenged with things outside of the norm. And so when that happens in a place we perceive to be safe, we're there every day, we're there around people that we know.
And often you even need a key card to get into that workspace.
Yeah, right. And it sounds like in this case, many of those, safety measures were in place, but even with some of those, hardening of the sites and some of those kind of things, these events can still happen. And I think it drives home for all of us the feeling of even in places that we're normally feeling safe, we may not always be, and that stirs up a lot for all of us.
All right, so that's an example of just a horrific headline of an outside person coming in, causing harm, causing violence, causing death. But then there are those stories, and a couple come to mind. McDonald's CEO a couple years ago, and the bad headlines there. Elon Musk, and we question where are his emotions. Summer of 2025, the CEO of Astronomer caught on Kiss Cam at a Coldplay concert with the chief people officer of Astronomer. I mean, that just seems dumb, the Astronomer situation. But when you're actually looking at leaders and what seems like just a blown up ego, what is happening in those situations, Dr. Arvig?
Well, every situation's a little bit different. The important thing to remember about a lot of leaders is leaders aren't born, they're made, right? So most of us that end up in leadership roles end up there because we're good at the jobs that we did and we were promoted up through the ranks to that leadership role so that we're leading other people. There's no training manual for how to be a good leader. And what we see in many of these circumstances is people that simply, very basic things that they struggle with that can make, situations for employees difficult.
Well, it seems like when you say there's no training manual, I might argue there are a lot of leadership books out there. There are communication books. I myself wrote one, Communicate That, helping people communicate in all different kinds of situations. I work with C-suite executives in trying to prevent crisis and be better leaders. But it also is pretty true that top leadership is a lonely place.
Very much is. If you think about all the challenges that we all face on a daily basis in our personal lives, in our friendships, sometimes when we come to work, there's a lot going on, and we struggle with functioning at work. If I'm a leader, I have all of that going on. Plus, I have an additional layer of responsibility, caring for my people, making sure that the work gets done, making sure that the organization continues to drive forward. And that's a lot on a leader's plate, right? And they might not feel like they have a place to vent that, right? Or to process that. It's like you said, it can be a lonely place, especially in times of crisis when you're leading, and you need to lead with empathy and with compassion. And that's not something that we're charged to do every day. It can be a real struggle.
Empathy has been such a buzzword. In fact, we've covered it on the Crisis Files. What are some of your tips for how a leader who might be nervous about showing too much vulnerability can actually lead with empathy and lead with honesty and transparency?
I think you just mentioned it there, honesty and transparency. I think the challenge becomes when I try and shield my people from realities, right? Or when I try to put a positive spin on everything. I think back to, and I still remember this clearly on 9/11, that evening the president addressed the nation, and he started to tear up in that address to the nation. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is the most powerful leader in the world at this moment. And he's showing some level of vulnerability. Now, he was also showing strength, but it just goes to show those two are not mutually exclusive.
That's a really nice reminder that you give us. They're not mutually exclusive. When you've done, you are a clinical psychologist. You've done work with people at their very core, dealing with their emotions, dealing with frustrations, helping them with this emotion regulation. What are some tips that you can give crisis filers as they go about their business, whether they're an employee or a leader?
You mentioned, there are books out there. You've written one, right? Get some knowledge. Take some time to learn and dig in on some things that you might struggle with. Every leader is going to have natural strengths and natural weaknesses. That's not a problem. The problem becomes when I don't know what my weaknesses and strengths are, right? If I know those things, then I can work around them, or I can work to build them. No leader is going to have every answer and be able to manage every situation independently. So how do I dig in? And some of that, frankly, for a lot of leaders, is taking some time to get some help for themselves, right? Therapy is not a bad thing. We do a lot of behavioral health intervention for very high-powered, leaders, and they find value not only in their personal lives, but in how they function in organizations and how they do their jobs more effectively. And so really it's just putting pieces together to get better at being a better human, which causes you to also be a better leader.
So true. I am wishing that people could give each other a break, but first and foremost, give themselves a break. But that being said, I would love for crisis filers to know a little bit more about the work R3 Continuum does. Listeners, viewers know that I'm a crisis strategist, but I specifically wanted to talk with you and shed some light on your organization because I'm working with the leaders, but I'm not going into the war zone or into the post-earthquake area or the post-flood or disaster area. I'm not on the ground in that way. You and your people are. What are some visuals, and you don't have to necessarily name clients, but what are some settings that you and your teams have been in so that people also understand you're a resource that's out there, but that they should get this kind of help in these situations?
Absolutely. There's no setting that we haven't responded in terms of a crisis. You mentioned the situation in New York right now. We're on the ground right now. Any of those situations, we're likely called in to support.
And you're going in, and what are you doing on the ground?
We're helping to support management so that they can better support their people and try and figure out, okay, what's next, right? How do we keep things moving in a positive direction, or how do we keep things from really devolving into something that becomes a bigger problem than it is? Critically, how do we support our people that might be experiencing real fears and anxieties about whatever that situation was that happened, right? You've taken their world and their sense of safety and you've kind of turned it on its head. And so those moments, those days after an event like this are critical for how do we support folks in those times. Humans are really resilient creatures, right? Most of us can deal with quite a lot and come through the other side okay, unscathed, right? But part of how we do that is putting those resources early on so that I can recognize my natural resilience and get through that without developing more entrenched difficulties and problems.
So let's talk a little bit about psychological principles that we can all take control of ourselves. Can you give just the regular person out there living their life, whether it's their family life, their work life, their community life, maybe they're a volunteer, how do we stay calm in those stressful situations?
That's a good question. It's going to be different for all of us. I think, know yourself a little bit. Know what your pain points are. Know what your hot buttons are. And if those are hit, find ways to deal with that for yourself. As it's important, especially in a work environment, people follow the emotional tone of their leadership. If the leadership is calm and collected, that's the tone people are going to pick up on and function with. If leadership is really erratic or struggling, that's what people are going to pick up on. So really think through what's the tone I want to convey within the workplace, and then how do I, to the best I can, embody that, knowing that it's not a perfect equation, right? It's not always going to go right, and having the ability to say, you know what? Sorry, I screwed that up. Let me start over.
I love that you talk about the tone. It reminds me of what I say to my clients. The calmer you are on the inside, the more powerful you are on the outside. And one of my inspirations is Yoda from the Star Wars. So I ask my leaders, how's the inner Yoda doing? Because Yoda was always calm. I mean, he lived forever. So obviously age didn't really get to him for it took a long, long time. That calmness, which means you do have to take control over your emotions. This episode is called Ego Dysregulation. So some tactics for regulating our own emotions. It sounds like you're saying first, know yourself, know your hot buttons, and then what are those things you do for yourself to calm down. I know for me, yoga is an important thing on a regular basis. Getting my exercise in, whether that's running, weightlifting, that just keeps the body a little more regulated.
Yes. Figure out what those things are for you. They're going to be different for all of us. If you told me to do yoga, I'd tell you that's more stressful than lots of other things.
Just can't quite bend that way, doctor.
Exactly. But figure out what those things are for you and figure out what things you can incorporate into a day without having to go somewhere or do something. So if I'm sitting at my desk.
Oh, that's awesome.
If I'm in a meeting, what are those things that I can do maybe other people wouldn't even notice, right? But they help me to center myself, right? And to calm my nerves. So some of those, getting to yoga, getting that exercise done, absolutely. And make sure you're making time for those things, but also have those little things throughout your day that you can plug in wherever.
This is so affirming. I'm just going to personally share. I just a few days ago told one of my clients, one of my CEOs, I need you to sit down at your desk at the top of every day and take 5 really long, deep breaths. And I'm going to check in with you every week because he said Please hold me accountable to that. So I have a little note to check in every Monday. How's the breathing going? And just that, I'm so sure, is going to help him through something he's working through right now.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like much, but it really is, especially in environments that can be chaotic and very busy, and you're jumping from one thing to another. Just that break, just the forced break of I'm doing nothing other than focusing on my breathing for the next 30 seconds or however long that is. It's amazing what a change that can make for folks.
And it costs nothing.
How
does fun play into all of this? Because I'm big on celebrating, I call it green space, the non-work stuff, trying to build that into every day.
It's important. And people talk about things like work-life balance, and that term always gets to me because it's a little outdated in my mind because it's maybe not realistic for a lot of folks. But this idea that I can't work 100% of the time, right? I have to unplug. I have to disconnect. I have to find something that's not that. And whatever it is for you, again, fun may be a vacation and that might cost money, but fun could be something, that you do at home that everyone else thinks is ridiculous, but you find pleasure in it.
Yeah.
Right?
Whatever it is for you, it's very personal.
Right.
As long as you're doing it.
Yeah.
All right.
And I think it's particularly hard these days. We all have our emails, our work emails, Teams, whatever it is on our phones. It's hard to really be off, right? Most of us struggle with being disconnected. But the reality is we end up worrying about things that, for the most part, they can probably wait till Monday, right? Just because it came in on Sunday doesn't mean I need to jump on it right away. We've kind of built that culture, and technology, as wonderful as it is, has reinforced some of that culture. But find times to shut it off.
It is important. It's really important to control it in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it is so great to have you in the studio, and I know we'd love to have you back, and you can keep us regulated on the Crisis Files, Dr. Arvig.
I would be more than happy to do that. Thank you, Roshini.
You're welcome. To connect directly with R3 Continuum, go to r3c.com. This case file is sponsored by Spoke 612 Productions. Spoke 612 Productions takes your ideas and brings them to life. Linda, Sarah, and Matt are committed to excellence and inclusivity. As a WeBank certified women-owned production company, Spoke 612 inspires awareness and delivers impact through storytelling. When you put your project in their hands, Spoke 612 draws on their own talents and experience to ensure they tell the best possible version of your story. Visit their portfolio at spoke612.com. Rate, review, and subscribe to The Crisis Files on your platform of choice. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at The Crisis Files. Visit thecrisisfiles.com for all 4 seasons of the show. I'm Roshini Rajkumar. Join me next time on The Crisis Files.